Let's continue this event. Yep. My name is Attila Csóka. I'm also from Paradigma Ariadne Architectural Studio and also co-curator of this exhibition. Glad we get together. This is the title of this event, and I can ensure that for all of us it's the first time after so many time we meet each other and be here in the pavilion. Most of you, this is the first time you saw the exhibition as exhibitors. This morning it's supposed to be this two roundtable discussion, and as you know, it was the first one postponed somehow, but it's supposed to be about the experience of the exhibitors in the collaborative process and the development of this exhibition. In 2019, we had a workshop in Budapest with the participants where we had fruitful conversations, and after almost 2 years pause, I hope we can continue where we left. The Hungarian Pavilion exhibits works by 12 practices from 9 different countries this year. And here I have to mention what Daniel already told in the previous discussion, that this is the first time in the history of the Biennale when international collaborative work is exhibited in our national pavilion, and it's a big thing, I think. It gives a good opportunity to talk about this importance. Let me introduce the participants of the discussion. Sridan Zlokopa from A Collective, Serbia, Italy, Poland, and Sweden, cross-border collaboration. Denmark, sorry, very sorry. Silvia Šaleva from Contra, Slovenia, Macedonia, and Croatia. Stefan Stojanovic from Agata. Again, Agata is the next one. Somehow I miss Agata from this row, but anyway, yes, sorry. Agata Woźnicka from Bucud from Poland. Stefan Stojanovic from Mada, Serbia. Wojciech Rada from Czech Republic. Horia Spirescu from Bucharest, Romania, Studio ACT. And last but not least, Martin Jančok, sorry, from Prula, Slovakia. For those who are not familiar with I would like to summarize the concept of this exhibition. The reception of the post-modernist architecture heritage in Hungary is in a very controversial position, as it's written in the catalogue. In Central and Eastern Europe, modernist post-war buildings, relics of socialist modernism, are in an increasingly threatened position. Their situation in Hungary is becoming more and more politicized, seen as a remnants of communist past. They have no future and are demolished or refurbished. The architectural heritage of a whole generation is getting lost. With Daniel, David, and Szabolcs, we made an attempt to reappropriate this heritage. For this occasion, we selected 12 buildings from Budapest, from the socialist modernist era, which are representative examples of this era. As 12 studios from Central and Eastern Europe, with the hope to find new possibilities of architectural heritage management. We made this decision with the intention that it will be so easy to understand and talk to each other because we share the similar backgrounds, similar historical and social experiences. We were looking for offices whom it seems through their works has this Eastern European identity. In the next 40-50 minutes, I would like to discuss about this identity and your personal and professional relations to the socialist modernist heritage. I also would like to start with a really simple warm-up question, and I would like to ask you to go one by one. How is modernist architecture accepted in your countries by the public, investors, or decision maker? What is your experience? Please start, Martin or Horia. It's really up to you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being invited to this discussion. I think the answers are going to be quite similar, so I'm really excited what are going to be the differences. But in our country, especially the late modern heritage is becoming quite discussed in recent years. It has a certain degree of attention, but mostly from the professionals, from people who are interested in like similar fields like architecture, art, history. I mean, among the general public, it's still perceived as some kind of a remnant of previous regime. It's not very popular. Sometimes it's the political stain that's on it, but I think people in general have a problem or lost some kind of appreciation towards something that has a certain degree of generosity in it. And I think all the late modern heritage in Slovakia, but also in Czech Republic, which like we shared it for a long time and for the same period. So it provides some sort of quite complex body of work of good quality public architecture, and it doesn't have any continuation of the architecture of last 30 years after the regime changed has never been able to produce so interesting or so valuable good quality architecture as that period. So there has been interest in it, or there is starting interest in it. There is actually a group of young architects that are making a TV series about the building and the architects. We could discuss the form of it because it's kind of a very image related. It's you can see the influence of the contemporary media, environment, and the way that architecture is perceived more as some kind of image, and it's not. I'm quite a little bit critical towards it. I'm really appreciating that something like that is happening, but I'm a little bit skeptical about the depth of the understanding of the particular architectural episode. So, but sorry for being too long.
Yes, no, thank you.
I think you already said a lot of things that I would say as well. And I think it's a really interesting thing, because you started by saying that you're probably going to mention a lot of things that we are all going to mention. And actually, the first thing that went through my mind when you asked the question was the difference between the architect's perception and the one of the public's perception, let's say the non-architects. And it's true, they associate it a lot with the period in which it was built, and maybe it doesn't necessarily come with the nicest sort of correlations from a political perspective as well. But architects, I think, are looking into it with a lot of interest, and they're trying to learn a lot of things from it and sort of try to inject them in their work. Because it doesn't mean that modernism passed and now it's not good anymore, definitely not. You can still take a lot of good stuff out of it. But then there's also this question that I find is quite interesting regarding how you could keep it as it is, but also adapt it to the most recent contemporary needs. As in create the necessary infrastructure inside these remaining buildings and sort of transform them in order to make them be less redundant without destroying them, without actually butchering them. And I think that's a really nice, would be the subject of a really nice research generally. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's not a problem if we repeat each other because we can ensure that the problem is exists. So, but also if you have good experiences, we can share that as well. So, Wojciech?
Well, yeah. So, the ditto, they say. Yeah, but in Prague, generally the situation is that the late modernist buildings are like yummy cakes to, like delicious cakes to very rich people who buy it and then eat it, basically. So, like very recently, there was, yeah, it's also, I think it's a Slovak-Czech company, Penta. They ate a few of those buildings recently. Then we have this richest guy who recently died in a helicopter crash, and he demolished a building which was on his. So he was looking from his villa to this modernist hotel, and now it's not there anymore. But there is a school instead of that, so it's. I guess that's. But he demolished it like from the middle with like this huge metal sphere. So it was like yeah, like a great fuck you gesture. And yeah, and recently there was also an iteration of letters to the mayor, organized and curated by Katka Kulanova as well. And they asked like various architects from modernist era, like to share, you know, like write a letter to the mayor. And one of the guy who built most of the buildings, Václav Aulický, he just suggested what are the buildings he has and were not demolished, and perhaps, yeah, like this is the list which you could actually, you know, choose to go on. Like those are the buildings which you should demolish next. So that's like it's a bit ironic situation, I would say. We are good with irony, so that's.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting us to be a part of this, of course, and. I would like to just add on more of the same. Basically, in Belgrade, what's maybe the biggest or the hottest topic regarding the modernist heritage is, of course, New Belgrade, which is kind of an urban phenomenon that still lives and changes all the time. And mostly, modernist architecture is not given enough credit in Serbia. It is very well used and everybody enjoys it, but somehow it has this historical baggage that still haunts it, and then there is a lot of trauma based on the period after the 80s and continuing to the 2020s now. So it's basically the biggest issue is that modernist architecture allowed the city to spread in surface and to be very wide, and then it allowed for a lot of densification in the recent years. So that's like the hottest topic that's debated right now in context of modern architecture is how we can somehow preserve its spaciousness and prevent the congestion that's going on right now. So we kind of tried to reflect that in the work that we did, but yeah.
Okay, thanks. So in Poland, I think that we are in a process of updating what is our architectural heritage. And there is a discussion about how late modern or like late modern and postmodern architecture also makes Polish cultural landscape and how we should preserve it. And from there we can see the discussions and manifestations and actions that try to prevent demolishing some valuable buildings in Wrocław, for example. And after demolishing many I don't know, spectacular buildings such as a railway station in Katowice, I think that people, not only architects but regular people, see that we lost the opportunity here to bring these modern ethos to the contemporaneity. And what I also see in Poland, that modernism is treated in a very graphic and only aesthetical way. So we only appreciate it only for its aesthetics, and we don't speak enough about the values of the space, and we don't speak about urban planning. That was also very important when designing in this kind of style in this era. So there is this quite complicated situation, but I think that we miss a discussion about urban qualities of social late modern architecture.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for inviting us to this debate. I can agree to the previous panel members what they have already said. Like to us, I mean, because we are working in Slovenia, Croatia, and Macedonia. I can agree most of it with Mada. I think that this kind of baggage that it is from this era when the buildings were produced, or this urbanism in that period, people are not really aware, first of all, I think, of this heritage, or they don't recognize it as a heritage anymore because the system is changed. So I think that's something that we all share in this kind of collaboration that we have. But maybe I can point out, in our experience, that Skopje, for example, in Macedonia, was one of the cases that we can really see how the modernist architecture is really not acknowledged, not recognized as a quality. Because, yes, architects lost their battle there. The situation is up to the politicians or a particular structure of the society that we faced this kind of massive change, change of putting a new layer to the city of the center of Skopje, which made it not recognizable. We don't have this heritage anymore. So, as an example, I can put that as a trigger for further discussion, what do we do with this architecture for future? Thank you.
So, thank you again. And, well, I can just talk in the shape of an expat, because saying now that I can represent and to experience, I always lived abroad, but that's also maybe interesting because I'm part of this third country of people from the East that never lived in the East, and then they end up kind of in this big personal dramas of identity and whatever. But so as a kind of a foreigner that has a connection, for me it was always very fascinating to see how in the case of the territory of ex-Yugoslavia, there was always from the West this big appreciation for the figure of the god, the Plečnik. And how after this experience that was linked to kind of the time after the First World War, when the kind of communists started, the whatever architecturally passed in Yugoslavia, it was completely ignored. Now there is in a certain way a kind of a revival, and that I hope it's not going to be just a kind of a form of exotic going to go to see some spomenik around the Balkans, but it's for sure becoming a topic, definitely. But it's a matter then, yeah, it would be a long discussion now. Is it about how you historiographically, in a historical way, put inside an experience, and how to kind of there is a need to kind of discuss more what happened there, because the quality of the buildings is kind of clear. Thank you.
Thank you. What you brought into about this Eastern people, but never lived in the East, it's a quite interesting question itself. I think we will talk about it later on. The idea behind that we invited young studios was also that maybe we have as a generation a decent distance in time of this kind of architecture. Do you think that is it a question of generation, that we think in a different layer about this architecture? We see this architecture through the different lens. What's your opinion? What do you see in your places, co-workers and so on?
Yeah, well, definitely. I think that for us as a generation, is kind of there is the possibility to abstract a little bit from a direct personal kind of experience, so that you can see it more as just an architectural building, which is also kind of the case maybe in Italy with the kind of the Eur in Rome and the possibility of just taking it as architecture, and also the pyramids were done with slaves at the end. So, like, there is for sure this kind of distance that is needed.
Yep. Sylvia?
I would say that as younger generation of architects, I think that maybe we're like revising from a different perspective, because we live in this digital era. We have more information, we have more open spectrum for this international collaborations, sharing experiences. So I think that, as Srdjan said, we are keen to abstract it a little bit and look onto this background, to seek up for inspiration, or to look up to the quality or the positive sides that this period of architecture brought, so that we can maybe use as part of our further experience and knowledge. Should I just pass on?
I will just agree with you, because basically I think that our generation, like my generation, I was brought up like on the verge of communism and capitalism in Poland. So I look at these buildings not as political manifestations of the regime, but only from the aesthetical point of view. So I think this is why architects of my age or younger are starting to appreciate the style.
Well, definitely this distance is something that I'm reminded of each time I talk about all these issues with my parents, for example, and their take on somehow this baggage that we all mentioned is quite different to our interpretation, which is mostly optimistic about it. And part of it is also in that like the best architecture in Belgrade, for example, a lot of it is made in those years. So, and also the programs that were developed in that time period are much different than today. So we as young architects always have this vision of that period being like some golden age where you had a chance to design public buildings, very good public buildings, and museums and cultural institutions and everything. And today it's kind of limited to other sectors. So for us it's also this kind of nostalgia for a period that we never kind of experienced firsthand. So it's an interesting point of view, definitely.
Yeah, I think what's good about the fact how my generation, or at least I, see those buildings is that you always look at it from the positive side, like you see the positives. And I guess that could be also quite dangerous, because yeah, it makes it yeah, it could seem like as an idealistic perception of something which perhaps could have been much worse. But what I think is a good opportunity we still do have is to talk actually to the people, you know, who design those buildings, because I think for most of them it was also like about the positive side of what they could do, and also they had to do some compromises, I guess, with the political powers, etc. So I guess, I mean, I don't really do it, but I see that some people in my generation are starting to ask the people who were designing those stuff, like, why, what were the reasons behind this, and that's I think it's a nice thing we could do, like to take this positive approach and ask the people who actually did it, like if they are still alive.
Thanks.
I think it's an interesting question and a bit tricky in the same time. It's because the first thought would be to say yes, definitely. This is how the human brain works. It just creates different connections, and it associates things according to the experiences that it had. So by that, you could understand that other generations associate this type of architecture with their experiences, whereas us, we see it from ours. But the architecture is the same for everyone, and like every architect who is sort of in touch with contemporary trends could potentially see the same values in it. Now, so from this perspective, I think everybody should appreciate it just the same, like as specialists, not as people. But then generally, it's just normal that everybody individually, emotionally, has a different approach to it. And I guess this is something that must be worked with in a way. So my answer would be yes and no at the same time.
Thank you.
I think naturally there needs to be some critical distance towards this kind of a very intensive and very important period of architectural history. You cannot imagine something like that happen in the 90s, which was like the overall attitude was like, yeah, let's forget everything and now we can start the engines and begin to, define our new world or our future, which, crashed quite quickly. But that's not the point of this debate. So I think there needs to be some distance. But for example, for me, I was still like 11 when the regimes changed, and it was 1989 was when I was 11. So I still remember it. I was relatively young, so as a child. So I was not I have positive memories. My life was not somehow limited by by those conditions. It also means that you didn't invite only young architects, but you also you managed to invite one which is a little bit older. But okay, it doesn't. I have my colleagues are much younger than me, but it's not. I think it's possible to. It's like you said. It's if we are able to maintain a certain distance, it's possible to approach the theme even with the with knowing what it meant at the time or something. But I wanted to react on what Wojciech said, that it's about the creators of the buildings, that they are already very old or they don't live anymore. So we are at this moment when actually the people who built it or defined it are disappearing. And I think that's the thing that needs to be done first to communicate as much and try to get this first-hand experience directly from them. And it also can show us how to think about the architecture or how to also present it, how to work with it. We did an exhibition a couple of years ago with with Vladimir Dedeček, who was like one of the main heroes of that era. And we did it in form of some kind of interview when there was a split screen and he was talking about his projects, and at the same time he was drawing and sketching and building models on the table. And I found it extremely interesting to show the way he was developing the project, how we thought, how we formed the architecture. And this is something that that will be lost completely if we don't act immediately and directly approach the architects themselves.
That's right. I would like to go on with a different question and turning to this identity stuff. As I mentioned previously, when we were looking for these offices, it was quite important that they somehow share this Central and Eastern European identity. It was difficult how to say it politely, and how to talk about this quite sensitive stuff with you. Do you think our first intention about these young practices with Central Eastern European identity was appropriate or not? I mean, for some of you it was quite obvious. When I remember Butsu, the name was quite interesting for us because it really reflects somehow this connection. Also, as we read in the website of Contra how they try to expose themselves, it was quite obvious. What do you think? What is your opinion, and what do you think about this identity? Do you feel it, think it? How can you relate this?
Should I continue?
Sure.
Yeah, I will pass the mic back then. I mean, it's obvious that we share a lot, as was already said in previous comments. So there is definitely like certain commonalities we share. Basically, in broader terms, the same territory. We share a lot of history. But what is interesting is last 30 years maybe. I mean, each country took a slightly different path. I wouldn't say it's like too much difference in in long-term perspective, but it's interesting to see but it would need to go into more detail to I think particularly know what are the differences and discuss it. So I think that your choice to bring us all together was quite natural, and I didn't have any hesitations about the meaning of it or the initial idea of it.
Thank you. I think that culturally and professionally it was a really nice experience, and both fun but also bringing a lot of value. But then if I would answer this question in a personal matter, I would definitely say that for me it was without sort of exaggerating at all, an amazing experience. It's just a personal thing. I always enjoy when I'm able to step out and like engage different cultures, different people from different cultures. I guess it feels a bit like stepping out of the closet in a way. It's just sort of a nice feeling to be able to be open about yourself and engage other people with your openness and expect the same in return. And I think this worked quite well in our case. So yeah, I really appreciate the whole thing, and
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense as well. It's again the same answer, I would say. About to let's say maybe illustrate it a bit. I remember when we met first time in Budapest. There was this moment when I think someone commented that we are like anonymous architects, let's say, sharing our. Yeah, it's like it's the same, right? Yeah, it's the same, and that was basically it. Like that was the moment when I thought, like, yeah, it's. It totally makes sense. So, yeah, anonymous architect.
But it's kind of the same now, right? Like we are sitting in a circle and just like discussing our traumas or something. But for us, it was the most interesting thing, so to say, was that there is this notion of like an interchangeable terms between socialist architecture and modernist architecture in Serbia. So it's kind of regarded as the same thing between our parents' generation, for example. So it's kind of this distinction that's very fragile, and also have to work on it to kind of detach the meaning behind. And for us, initially, when we got the invite, and then there was this notion of Eastern Bloc countries, so we were like, okay, but wait, we don't have your usual Eastern Bloc architecture in Belgrade, because that was like kind of a breakup with the Soviet Union at the time. So the concept of New Belgrade was kind of surpassed that notion of socialist agenda for a moment. So it was kind of interesting to ponder on that idea, like how can we develop this in something else. And then there is also this this idea of of architecture of that period to be international, and also communism is like shared values and everything. So we kind of wanted to dig in and see all the differences between different communisms that existed in our countries. So that was also kind of interesting to see what's everyone's initial reflex and reaction to the notion of that period, and also how that colors their view of buildings of the time, and because they are definitely like a derivative of the way people lived back then. So for us, it's also like amazing to see all those things, and to feel it coming from people who are our contemporaries living in different contexts that are kind of similar, but also not that much. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so in my opinion, we, like the architects from the Eastern Bloc, are usually perceived as people like of no country, but of the East. So, especially when being in like contrasting the Western architects, when they are always like Danish architects, or like they always have nationality, we just have the whole region. So for us it was super interesting and challenging to take part in this exercise of checking if we really share so much or not. And I think that the exhibition shows that even though we share like the history, and we share some, let's say, unconscious characteristic features that we don't speak about and we cannot even articulate, but they are in us. That our approach towards the heritage is totally different, and you can see it that we can look at it from many different perspectives. So probably it's time that we are not an Eastern Bloc, but the mix of, or like the composition of these many countries that have some separate voices.
Thank you.
For us, I think because we also started as an international practice, okay, based on this Balkan area, but we also shared this kind of thoughts and knowledge because we had different background, like different studies, like Eric, for example, is from Slovenia, me and Mirjana, we're from Skopje. So we tried to also put that into our work, like what we do today in our projects. And I think this invitation came very refreshing. I mean, it was something really intriguing and interesting to participate in, because we were like, yes, why not? As Agata said, we belong to this eastern side, that we have to show that, yes, there are studios or architects or professionals that can present something valuable, or in the end, let's just rethink or check where are we standing, and have some conclusions in the end, which I think with the proposals, or we got really interesting answers actually in the exhibition that we now have today. So I think it was a success.
Thank you.
Yeah, for us this was a question for sure. Like we were asking also ourselves, does this make sense actually to invite just East European offices to deal with the heritage of East Europe? Like would be maybe definitely also interesting to see what would be a proposal of an office from Tokyo to kind of a building in Budapest. So like on this level of the practitioner, like the choice is maybe kind of a little bit questionable for under my modest point of view. But on the other point of view of the little social experiment that you generated here, in which I think at the end the whole it's like really two levels, as you said. It's really true that like it's just at the end modernist architecture. At the end, it's not. It maybe also has a bit less of specificity that we like to believe as East European people, because we have always this kind of like connection between meanings and then the fact that the building is just at the end, the building, and this social kind of experiment part, I think, is also the interesting point, and I hope this is the direction that we are going, is to kind of really detach the meaning from, in a certain way, from to just see it as a building. And this is something that actually then inside this closed club that we generated, it gets for sure interesting, because then there is all this kind of ability to discuss about this opposition. This is something always very interesting in East Europe, that basically there is always like the breaking point and nothing happened before and nobody was part of it. We are all freed and like epurated from our own past. And this is somehow, yeah, I think it's interesting to put people that have all this kind of background together.
Thank you. It's 1 o'clock, and in a few minutes we have to close this discussion. But now I would like to open up if we have any question from the audience or comments to continue. Well, if it's not, then we are in time. I have to say thank you for all of you, not just for the discussion, but sure, please. Here is the mic. Sorry.
So since Daniel is sitting right next to me, I'll take advantage of it to ask a question to the curatorial team, actually. So one of the things that made a huge impression on us in Budapest was that the presentation of the project, when eventually we showed Kellenfold interpretation and project and so on. And then a couple of visitors that attended the entire presentation approached to us, and they literally like thanked us, like, oh, it's a huge thing you are doing. They didn't realize the entire setup. But my question goes to you, if there was some progress on that kind of activism on reigniting the debate on modernist heritage in Budapest. Like, is that one of the results back home?
Well, in this sense, it's kind of hard to evaluate, because obviously this project is part of a wider wave of effort to do something about this heritage. But while you all know that 2 of the 12 buildings that we have originally chosen has been demolished in the past year, on the other hand, for example, I was invited by the chief architect of Budapest to collaborate with the office to select 100 buildings from the 60s and the 70s and to give them a certain kind of municipality level protection. This is happening right now. So I think this is part of this process that we are going into. I'm not necessarily really up for municipality level protection. I think it's kind of a boring thing. But certainly it helps us to finalize a canon, at least, to think about what kind of buildings are really the ones that we should go up for, and what are those that we can like let go, that some of you did in the exhibition. For me, I mean, if I want to reflect on the approach that we have taken and that you have taken, that there are many ways to deal with this kind of heritage. In that sense, I don't see the influence yet, but I really hope that we can continue this way, actually, because that was what I really liked in the exhibition.
Yes, and we will continue it, because the exhibition will be exhibited in Budapest, so it's also a big step, because for the Hungarian wider public, it will be visible only then. So I'm really waiting for. But sorry, Wojciech.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, for me, the most important stuff what you did is that you put us together, and now it's now this was a great kickoff. And I think it's really important to, you know, take care about the connections we have, like not to lose them. And that's yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Just like, you know, thank you, and that we should somehow, yeah, I'm open for collaboration, or you should too.
Szabolcs also has a comment.
Thank you. Yeah. That's the thing. So just to complete Daniel's thoughts, that so a lot of a lot of tremendous time that we saw the objects that you made, the whole the manifestos but we call it artifacts, and somehow they blend me together with the buildings, and I don't know it's intentional or not, because probably in some point of the design it was intentional that this part of the room, which is the showroom, is the exact position of the buildings, and the lab, which is behind us. These are the mirroring images of the building, and somehow they are. I'm interpreted in that they are the fading images of the building, and these are the future and the reality of the buildings, because they are in the same position, and somehow they really. And they turned into reality for me, and turned into the buildings, and just kicked the story forward, and somehow this is the future.
I mean, just one sentence. In this sense, and I really got this feedback that we managed to change the meaning of the buildings, which I think Siljan was referring to. So now they are seen as different buildings, and now they are seen more like artifacts, actually, or artistic production than the remnants of the past. So, yeah.
That's it.
Any other comments or questions? If no, then thank you very much for the conversation, and thank you very much for your effort you put into this exhibition. Continue somehow.